Hello, folks. Welcome to Somatics on the Spectrum. This is a webinar for folks who are on the autism spectrum who want some support with common issues like fatigue and anxiety, too much sensory input, or maybe you're transitioning from pre-diagnosis to post-diagnosis and you're finding out, oh, I'm autistic, or I'm Aspie, or I'm on the spectrum, and you're trying to work with that. So any of those things, I'm going to be sharing some practical tips for working with things like anxiety, fatigue, too much sensory input, and also how well you're treating yourself on this journey. And my name is Vanasar Tarakali. I have a personal interest in this subject matter because I found out I consider myself Aspie. I found out I have Asperger's several months ago. And I have been a somatic practitioner and a trauma healing practitioner for years now. And I thought I would like to share with other folks on the spectrum and people that support them. I'd like to share some of these tips to make life a little easier and for you to treat yourself as kind as possible as you're on this journey. So if you want to ask any questions at any time, you can type in the chat bar and I'll answer them as best as I can. Okay. So let's see. So about healing trauma. So what I want to say is that autism itself, I don't think of as a trauma, but ableism is. So the world is just like the world. The social world is racist and sexist and homophobic and transphobic. It's also ableist. So the world is not built to make things easier for people with disabilities, including people who are neurodivergent, who are not neurotypical. And that includes people on the autism spectrum. So some people would say that autism and Asperger's are disabilities. And from a social justice perspective, a disability is we actually have a disability because society around us is not built for our kinds of minds. And we might stand out in a bad way. We might seem odd or quirky and people can often misunderstand us and bully us, things like that. It's really common. But that's about ableism, and it's not inherent to being on the spectrum. A lot of folks think that being on the spectrum is just a different way of having a brain. It's a different way of your neurological system working. And the world has got neurotypical and neurodivergent folks in it. And that makes for the beauty and the diversity of the world. And also, if you read Steve Silverman's book, Neurotribes, he makes it pretty clear that people on the spectrum have contributed to so many things that make our society work well, especially scientific and artistic things. We wouldn't be looking at each other over on our computers without autistic people. Autistic people invented computers. So that's just one example. We wouldn't even be having this discussion over a computer without autistic people. So what I want to say about this then is that autism and Asperger's is not inherently trauma or traumatic, but ableism is. And so the world that's built for neurotypical folks frequently gets in our way and puts barriers in our way for having relationships that we like, having work that we love functioning, and getting our needs met. So this world built for neurotypical people, who are in the majority, it obstructs us, and it also shames us. So it's not unusual to hear somebody speak disparagingly about somebody on the spectrum because they don't make eye contact. Well, eye contact, as you probably know, is very intense and sensitive for people on the spectrum, and there's a reason why eye contact can be avoided by somebody who's autistic. So that's an example of where people on the spectrum get shamed and vilified. And what happens when we get shamed and when we're dealing with ableism is we start internalizing those opinions and that feedback, and we start feeling like, what's wrong with me? Something's really wrong with me. I better try to fit in, I better try to change. And so this is internalized oppression is what we're talking about here. So, and then a lot of us spend a lot of our lives trying very hard to placate and fit in with neurotypical people. So this webinar is not about that. And it's about honoring that you have an interesting, unique brain that probably is contributing incredible things to the people around you, to the society, or probably can, certainly can. And maybe you're somebody who has a special interest or focus on animals, and you can do amazing work with animals. Or maybe, like me, you have a special interest in healing and trauma healing. Then you can turn that, and many of us do, turn our special interests into ways to support ourselves and ways to contribute in a meaningful way to the world. And so in this webinar, I want to celebrate and honor you and your brain and your gifts. And I'm going to really focus on that today, and on also how to work with some of the difficult things that come along with being a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world, and that make things extra hard for those of us on the spectrum. And again, I'm going to say those again. I'm going to be sharing somatic practices and perspective about anxiety, because a lot of us deal with anxiety, about fatigue, because we get really tired from either putting up a front to try and seem as neurotypical as possible, or dealing with a lot of social and sensory input that can really exhaust us. So anxiety, fatigue, and also too much sensory input. We still have to function in the world, and yet there is, for many of us, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our sense of touch gets overstimulated, sometimes just by getting up in the morning. So I've experienced, and I've spoken with some other folks on the spectrum who, in the morning, they're feeling so many sensations, and there's so much input that's coming in a disorganized way. There's just so much going on, just existing when you get up in the morning, that it's really hard to find your stomach and find out if you're hungry, and then be able to eat and bring food into your body. That for a lot of us, it takes a couple of hours to get ourselves settled and centered and calm enough that we can eat. This is a common thing. So, and then, if people tell you breakfast is the most important meal of the day and all this stuff, that doesn't actually work for a lot of us. We may need to have a late breakfast, and that's fine. So that's an example of me sharing with you something that's really common that people on the spectrum deal with on a daily basis, and that we could either internalize criticism about, like, oh, I'm not having breakfast as my important meal, I'm not getting to that soon enough, there must be something wrong with me, or I'm doing it wrong. We can internalize what the neurotypical world tells us and shame and blame ourselves, instead of, which is what I want to share with you today, instead of befriending our particular brain and befriending our particular temperament and our body and working with it as it actually is, so that we can thrive and function and feel good. So that's my big catchphrase is befriending your body. It's kind of like, we don't need to make who and what we are spontaneously wrong. We don't have to fight it. And if we don't like some of the ways that we are, because we're exasperated if we get overstimulated easily, or if we get anxious a lot, I want to share with you ways to work with that so that you can have more choice about how you feel. What kind of state are you in? How activated are you, or how upset are you? That's what trauma healing work is about. That's what somatics work is about. So that's what I'm going to share with you. And the framework I want to keep emphasizing is, we're not doing it to fix you. We're not trying to fix ourselves. We're trying to be gentle and kind to ourselves in a world that often isn't kind to us, that often doesn't accommodate us. And we're wanting to give ourselves as much tools as possible to be able to function and recover from a neurotypical world. So when I talk about healing trauma in the case of Asperger's or autism, I'm really talking about healing from really the trauma inflicted on us by other people, not getting us, not creating a space for us. So let's talk about anxiety. Anxiety is way up there. It's really, really, really common for folks on the spectrum. There's probably lots of reasons for it, but it really is a thing. So I'm about to share with you some somatic practices, some tools, and I'm hoping you'll look at this as like a buffet. It's like, here's a tool, and here's another tool, and here's another tool. And I'd like you to sample the tools that I'm sharing with you and start to notice if your body is saying yes or no, or meh, I don't know, maybe, to the tool I'm sharing with you. And I'd like you to start, you're really paying attention to the sensations in your body as best you can to find out this yes, no, or maybe. And that way, as I share with you different tools in the buffet of somatic tools for anxiety, for example, you start to notice, oh, this tool that she shared works for me, but this one doesn't. And I'd like, by the end of this, our time together, I'd like you to hopefully have 2 or 3 tools that you went, oh, that really worked for me. I liked that. And I hope that if you find 2 or 3 tools that work for you, that you practice them. Because practice, doing the thing that helps you over and over, turns it into an embodied skill. A skill that nobody can take away from you. It's something that will become part of your automatic or near to automatic behavior. So here we go. Anxiety. So the first practice I'd like to ask you to try on is pretty simple, is take 3 deep breaths. Breathe in a really big breath, and as you breathe out, you're going to let a sound or some kind of sigh or sound fall out your mouth as if it was falling down towards your feet, towards the ground. So here we go. I'm going to do it with you. So that's one. Just take as deep a breath in as you can, and breathing out, make a sound or a sigh. Let's do a couple more. Doesn't matter what sound you make, just make this sound that works for you right now. And so you might notice that as I did my 3rd breath and I sighed, I was moving a little bit. And that's because I've had a pretty stressful week. And as I did that last breath, my body started releasing some of its tension in the neck and shoulders, and it kind of wanted to just kind of shake out of it. And it was happening. I just let it happen. And that's a really important principle of finding out whether a somatic practice works for your body or not, is when something works for you, your body will show signs and symptoms of unwinding, of letting go of contraction in the body. So when we're dealing with anxiety, we contract, we tighten up. We might tighten our jaw or our eyes or our breath, or our heart might race, or we might contract our muscles in our shoulders, or our gut might contract. We might clench our butt. There's all kinds of things that we do when we're anxious that involve contraction. And if we're repeatedly experiencing things that make us anxious and we're repeatedly contracting, then we can build up quite a strong and lasting contraction or muscle tension, or even areas in our body that don't get as much blood circulation as they need. In different parts of the body, we can contract, and we can do it chronically. And some of you might notice there are places that often hurt in your body. And I just want to invite you, if you do have places like that, to start watching them and notice if they get a little tighter when you're stressed. Because it could be a long-term chronic contraction that you're doing. So anyway, so how I know the 3 breaths, that somatic practice, that body practice, how I know that works for my body is, there was movement starting to happen. So the opposite of contraction is movement. The opposite of contraction is fluidity, when things start to unwind, become more fluid. And so when the body moves from a contracted state to an unwound state, or an unwinding state, because it tends to be kind of slow and gradual, the unwinding process, we do things that involve movement or fluidity. So we might get tears in our eyes, or we might laugh, and laughter involves sound vibration as well as other kinds of movement. Or we might find ourselves starting to yawn. We might do a big yawn or yawn after yawn. And if you do one of these practices I share with you and you start yawning, that's a good sign that your body is saying, yes, I like this. I'm feeling a little more relaxed in the world. I'm feeling a little more safe in my body. When we yawn, when we laugh, when we giggle, when we sometimes when we start coughing or sneezing suddenly, or we just find ourselves finding a little more mobility in our body. So like I'll suddenly be wanting to move my shoulders or wiggle my toes. So just talking about this is making me yawn. So my body's very happy about even thinking about unwinding. So anxiety is contraction, and or you could think of your heart racing. And fluidity and unwinding means the heart is unwinding from a tight beat and getting a little more softer and rhythmic and relaxed. We might find our muscles soften. We might find it's easier to smile. Our face muscles might soften. Our eyes, our gaze might go from a hard, narrow forward gaze, as if we have those horse race blinders on, to a more peripheral vision and opening up of vision. So these are different body cues that let you know that you're moving from contraction to fluidity, from contraction to unwinding. And that's really important to reduce our anxiety, is to notice, these behaviors, these activities, these environments, these people, these animals make me want to yawn or laugh, or, oh, by the way, it can also be things like burping, sweating. You might suddenly sweat. So a lot of them can involve bodily fluids too. So there's a way in which even throwing up is an unwinding, although it's pretty not fun usually. Okay, so what else? What else brings our anxiety levels down? So those of us who are on the spectrum have generally a lot of anxiety, and then we have things that happen in our lives that happen to everybody that make us even more anxious. So one thing is we want to reduce our baseline anxiety levels, and having some kind of a daily or frequent practice of things that bring down our contraction and our anxiety really kind of overall starts building in a baseline level in our bodies of, oh, I'm safe, I'm okay, and the anxiety goes down. So containment is an important principle for giving the body a sense of safety instead of fear, anxiety. So containment means putting a container around some place in your body, or sometimes around your experience. And that means giving a structure or a beginning and an end to an experience or a part of your body. And I'm going to show you some examples in the buffet of containment. You can try this along with me if you like. Put your forearm across the top of your head, the crown of your head, kind of snugly, and put the other arm around too. Make a box around your head and see if you can make a tight box around your head that feels snug. You might want a looser box if it's kind of up to your body, so I'd like you to listen to your body. But what we have here is there's a box around my head and it's holding my skull, and if I can hold it really tight, it's holding my skull on the top and along the sides. And but if you want it a little loose, it's still creating a container around most of your head. And this is something that toddlers do automatically. And somebody did a study on toddlers when they did this and put little electrodes on them, on their heads, and measured what was happening to toddlers when they did this exact thing, because it's a really common thing for toddlers to do. And what they found out was it was kind of like rebooting their system. They would go from overwhelmed, overstimulated, exhausted to centered, rested, kind of okay, kind of like rebooting ourselves. And so this is a practice that toddlers do, and your body might like it too. So there's variations on this. You might find you don't like this, and it could be because it's hard to hold your arms like this. Although, by the way, you can do this lying down so that the bed or the floor is holding your arms up, so you're not holding your arms up in the air. And then you can relax and settle into the shape without making so much effort. But the other thing you can do is a containment practice a lot of us do is you can put on a hat. And that can make your body feel like just that kind of the anxiety goes down a little bit. There's some unwinding that happens. And you feel better. Some people can't sleep very well unless they wear a hoodie to bed or a hat to bed, and or wrap a scarf around their head as they're sleeping. So it's a containment practice. Some of us, when we're sleeping, we just need, the stimulation to be damped down as much as possible, not only darkness and quiet, but even, whatever our head is sensitive to being, muffled and held a bit. And so if you have trouble sleeping, you might want to try wearing a hoodie when you sleep and having that hood nice and tight around your head at night. Or you could wear a hoodie in the middle of the day when you're walking around, doing things, you're encountering a lot of people. For some of us, wearing a hoodie when we're around crowds or we're in classrooms or whatever can make us feel that containment feeling, that safety feeling. Because again, it's giving the body some structure and a sense of something's holding me and I'm not just open to all this input and maybe dissolving into everything. Instead, there's a container, there's a structure around me. You can also just simply put your hands on top of your head and push down, or you can squeeze your skull. And if any of you have like the kind of anxiety where your thoughts are racing and you can't seem to slow down your thoughts, and it just all feels like all too much, sometimes this pushing up against your skull bones, even your jaw bones, a little more gently on your jaw bones, but you can squeeze really hard on the rest of your skull. And it reminds your body that your skull is really firm, it's really thick, it's a container. And you may have a lot of activity whizzing around in here, but it's actually being held by the thickest bone in your body. Wow. So, but I'm a somatics practitioner. I practice generative somatics, and I do somatic coaching for trauma and changing your habits and working with all kinds of things that people want to make changes in their lives. And because I'm a somatics person, I'm going to say to you that feeling the sensations of feeling the body sensations of squeezing your skull, noticing like, here's the heel of my hand against my skull, here's the skull feeling the heel of my hand. Being with both those sensations, you're speaking to your fight or flight brain when you're paying attention to sensations. And this is a big part of somatic work, is starting to make friends with the sensations in your body and starting to deliberately speak to your body in the language of sensation. So I give my body a sensation of pushing and of feeling the firmness of my skull. And then my reptile brain, my fight or flight part of my brain goes, oh, we're solid, we're good, there's a beginning and end. I don't need to be too worried right now. Things are pretty good right now. I'm not in crisis. And so this is it's kind of like when you start doing these practices and your body gets used to them, it can be like magic sometimes, where you just do this a few times and your body goes, oh, right. I'm not just anxious and feeling all this and wondering what I have to deal with next. But I'm also this solid, firm, dependable. My skull stays right where it is. It doesn't cave when I do this. Feeling into those sensations and doing that repeatedly, it literally is speaking the language of our reptile brain or our brainstem. And it's telling it, we're good. We're okay. You're good. And so it brings down our reactivity. And so we can start creating these virtuous cycles of, oh, I'm getting reassuring sensations and I'm calming down and I'm feeling safe. And then because I'm feeling safe and I'm relaxed, then some of the things I might encounter that might normally really upset me, like, those of us on the spectrum hate surprises, right? So, your bus is late. That could actually make you pretty agitated, especially if it's going to make you late for something. But if I'm already starting out I've been doing a lot of this and my body likes it and I'm feeling, solid. I'm feeling solid and I'm feeling safe. Then we can take that kind of a situation. And we won't be so upset, not quite as upset, because our baseline level of anxious is lower than usual. And so when the bus is late, we'll be like, we'll be upset, but it won't grab us hard as it might if we hadn't been doing a lot of this. So, and also the bus is late and you are getting somewhat anxious. You can do some other somatic practices to help you be as relaxed as you can manage in that moment. So somatic practices can help with your baseline level of anxiety and reactivity, and it can also help when you're in a situation which is really troubling and upsetting, whether it's a situation that would be upsetting to anybody or a situation that's especially upsetting to you because of how your brain works and how it processes information and stuff. Okay, so let me tell you some more containment practices. You can bundle yourselves up in blankets. You can find places in your body that like a lot of holding and pressure, and wrap bandages, suspension bandages around them. You know, there may be places where you tend to feel yeah, a little more like exposed or vulnerable, and you can wrap those things up. You could put a scarf around your neck if it's your neck that feels more exposed or vulnerable, because our bodies, each of us, our bodies are unique, and we do need specific kind of tools and interventions depending on what the places in our body are that tends to get most activated when we're anxious. If your stomach tends to clench up and get really tight when you're upset, you might want to try lying down, not just after you've eaten, okay, but lying down and putting a sandbag. You can buy sandbags at yoga stores or online, or you can simply sew yourself a canvas bag and fill it with sand. Anyway, you want to like a 5 to 10 pound sandbag. You can lie down, put that sandbag right on your stomach, right on your solar plexus. So there's that containment feeling that the sandbag is holding you and you can't miss it. And it can make if it's right for your particular body, it can really relax that stomach so that you're not clenching up so much. It's kind of like you're meeting your stomach with an equal amount of presence and force, and your stomach might just go, oh, okay, I'm not on my own here. I'm good. Okay, you know, everything's under control. There's a beginning and end to things. And so that's another example. And you can use sandbags in all kinds of places. Those of us who feel anxiety in our chest, lying down, putting a sandbag on your chest can be just amazing. You might actually find that you breathe more deeply with a sandbag on your chest when you're anxious, that it just comes in and just goes, you're okay, I got you. And you can't miss it. You can't miss a sandbag. A sandbag is going to make you feel contained. So let's see. You could put sandbags on your feet when you're sitting with your feet on the floor. And a lot of people like that one, by the way. A lot of people do. So you might want to give it a try. So anything I invite you to try, you can say yes, no, or maybe to. And it's really good for you to notice what your body is saying in response to a practice so that you can avoid it if it's not good for you. And then you can also practice it if it is. And the more you practice it, the more it becomes an embodied skill that you can resort to with more ease. And also it'll have an impact on you quicker, because your body will go, oh, I know this one. I know what we're doing here. We are unwinding, you know. So some people, when we find the right containment practice for them, you know, I might put a sandbag on somebody's chest when I'm working with somebody on a body work table. That's part of the work I do. I might put a sandbag on somebody's chest, and of course I ask them, so the sandbag is on your chest, and so far is it a yes or a no or a maybe, this weight here? And if it's a maybe, we might leave it on for a bit, or we might take it off for a moment to just see, well, does your chest wish it was back? So this is what you can do also by yourself. You put the sandbag on. If you had a definite yes, then I would stay with it for a while until it's changed. If you get a definite no, you know, take it off and don't do that, or move the sandbag somewhere else and see what that's like. If you get a maybe, wait for a little bit, or take it off and then put it back and experiment, so that you'll start to get to know when your body's saying yes or no or maybe. So if I put a sandbag on somebody's chest while they're lying on the bodywork table in my office, and I see them start yawning, I might not even ask them if it's a yes, no, or maybe, because that yawn tells you right away that the body's going, oh, I feel safer. It's time to unwind a little bit. So I hope what you've heard me say about yawning, I hope that you will remember that and not scold yourself or other people for yawning, because, you know, we often tell people who are yawning, what's the matter? Are you bored? And no, the body is unwinding. Yay, it's great. It's a good thing. So, let's see. Other containment practices are, so there's a very special one that is getting in touch with the bones in your body, getting in touch with your skeleton. And I'm calling that a containment practice because your bones, and we've kind of been talking about that with the skull, your bones are your reliable, solid structure inside your body. It's definitely holds your shape of your body. So if we didn't have bones, you know, all of these tissues and muscles would just sort of slide off. And then we'd be kind of like Jello or an amoeba or something. So our bones hold our shape. And the metaphor there can also be, if you like metaphors, that our bones are holding our integrity. You know, they're holding who we are and what we're all about. So being able to feel your bones and sense your bones is a really good containment practice. And by the way, I'm just going to tell you another safety practice, which is not necessarily a containment practice, but it's definitely a somatic and sensory practice. I'm taking some sips of a hot drink now and again. And this hot drink is comforting for my body, my soma. And it's warm, and it's a full-bodied drink. It's not coffee, but it's a very full-bodied drink, very earthy drink. And it gives me the taste sensation of warmth and substantiality. So it's got ginger in it. It's got all kinds of things in it. It's got a lot of presence. It's substantial, this drink. And the warmth and the substance of it and the taste of it are all sensations that are communicated to my reptile brain and say, there's something definite here that you can really count on. You can't miss the flavor and the temperature of this. And it's comforting. And if I pay attention to the sensations of this hot drink, it literally is a somatic practice that is soothing my reptile brain, saying, definite, solid, good. This is meeting me. I feel it. It's not some wispy little drink. It's got oomph to it. So I'm telling you that partly because I like to be spontaneous, even though I just said people on the spectrum don't like surprises. I don't necessarily mind my surprises that I do from my being, but anyway, because you're seeing me do this, and I just want you to know that while we're doing this webinar, I'm actually supporting myself, nurturing myself, keeping myself grounded, and also that's something as simple as what you eat and what you drink and how much you pay attention to the sensations of it. As simple as that is a powerful somatic practice to soothe and ground you and get your reptile brain going, oh, I'm pretty good. Be safe right now. And unwinding happens. So one of the things I love about somatic work is a lot of it is just free. I mean, you know, once you learn a tool, you can do it on your own. Once you know, oh, a hot drink of this particular kind makes my body feel more safe and relaxed, then you can just do that again on your own. If you find out, oh, a hot bath is really, and by the way, a hot bath is a containment practice because the water is completely surrounding your body and giving you a sense of holding. And the warmth is also nice. And for some of us, I was talking about all of these containment practices earlier that are about kind of tightly holding you. But it also, if you are somebody who gets uncomfortable with being confined or restricted in any way, then getting in a hot bath can be a great containment practice because you can't miss it. It's holding you. It's giving you a container, a beginning and an end, and yet it's letting you move freely. So these are examples of ordinary life things that we can do and deliberately pay attention to the sensations. And that way you're over and over sending the message to your reptile brain, I'm good, I'm safe, right now I'm good. And so it builds up this reservoir of safety in the body. And that is partly what helps with the lowering your baseline daily level of anxiety. So back to your skeleton. You could be on the floor, lying down, or sitting up, or standing, but you can pay attention to your skeleton, to your bones. So I'm going to share with you a couple of ways to be there with your bones. And let's see. You can squeeze the bones of your fingers one by one. Squeeze them. And why we're squeezing them to make the sensations more vivid and real. Like, oh, wow, this is really there. And the thing about bones is because they're so tough and thick and strong, they push them and they don't collapse. They're not jello, they push back. So there's your container right there. It's reliable. And one of the ways you let yourself remember how reliable it is by squeezing it. And while you're squeezing it, your reptile brain is going, oh, that's something solid and definite that I can count on. And, you know, we have bones in our whole body. Our skeleton is portable. So it's an incredible resource when we're out in the world dealing with surprises, dealing with a lot of sensory input, dealing with social situations where we might feel anxious or confused or just exhausted by trying to interpret and translate and figure out how to behave. Like, all of this stuff is very, when we're out and about in the world, it's very anxiety provoking and exhausting, stimulating. And yet, wherever we go, we're carrying our skeleton with us. So we could be sneaking in bones containment practices wherever we are. We can sneak them in. I could be just repeatedly, and this might be a nice stimming practice too for you, that maybe doesn't catch people's attention so much. It's just between you and you. You could squeeze the bones in your fingers, and if you find that reassuring, then you know, you can do that in public. Or you can actually, when you're walking in public, you can imagine the bones in your toes and your feet and your lower legs and your upper legs, and notice your pelvic bones and your vertebrae and your shoulder blades and your rib cage and your sternum, your collarbones, the vertebrae in your neck, the bones in your shoulders and arms and hands, and your skull and your jaw. You could be walking around and just really tuning into, still there? Are they still there? And you can touch some of these bones now and again. These are kind of pretty ordinary things to do in social settings, to you know, touch part of your body a little bit. You can kind of go, yep, it's still there. My skull is there. It hasn't dissolved. I'm walking around and this whole skeleton is here holding me up. And it's especially powerful for your reptile brain because, again, we want to invoke the language of sensation. It's especially powerful for your reptile brain if you do the squeezing of your bones. So squeezing your toe bones and your feet bones, you could be sitting in a meeting, depending on the setting, and you could have your foot in your hand and squeezing the bones under the table, or you could, if it's a more informal setting, you could be sitting in such a way that you can push your feet against the floor or against whatever you're sitting on and just really feel the movement of your bones. When you feel the sensations in your toe and feet and leg bones, it's really reassuring. Our feet and our legs are built for useful things when we're in danger, which is how we feel when we're anxious. The toe and the feet and the leg bones are really good to remind us that we're built for kicking, we're built for running, we're built for bracing ourselves with our legs and our feet and our hips. In other words, there are things built into our biology that we can do when we're threatened or afraid, and they involve very much the feet and the legs. And so when you remind your reptile brain, oh, I have feet bones, I have toe bones, I have leg bones, by squeezing them or moving them or paying attention to those sensations, it automatically reminds our reptile brain, hey, I have resources to deal with what I'm afraid of. I have resources. I could kick, I could run, I could get ready. So I could, if I get knocked off balance, I can find my balance again. So it's that's really a powerful, a really powerful reminder, those sensations. And I just want to say a little bit about sensations. When I say sensations, I mean things like temperatures. So maybe my forehead feels cool, or my hands feel hot, or maybe I feel lukewarm. So you could notice sensations throughout your body of warm or cool or hot. So you can notice temperature. You can also notice textures. You can notice the texture of your clothing. Like I have a little, threads in here, embroidery in here, and it feels different than the flat cloth. So there's textures. We can notice the texture of our own hair if we have hair. We can notice the texture of our skin. We can, is it smooth, or is it rough, or is it patches of smooth and rough? And so noticing temperature, texture, we can also, for sensations, we can notice whether something is moving or still. So we could have fluttering feelings in our chest, or butterflies in our stomach feeling. That's a kind of a movement. We may feel a vibration in the body. We may feel just the movement of when we're moving our muscles or our limbs. We might just notice the movement there. And there's all kinds of sensations of movement that naturally happen in the body. There's pulsations and vibrations, and we can get little facial tics and all kinds of things. When we swallow, there's movement happening. So movement is another aspect of sensation we can pay attention to. And right now I'm kind of pointing to, when I ask you to pay attention to your sensations, and also give your body particular sensations, like, okay, I'm going to feel the solidity. I might be feeling texture here, or temperature. I don't feel much movement when I push my skull. All of these things are the language of the reptile brain, sensation. So it can be good to start building our vocabulary of sensation words. And what else? Noticing the sensation of whether there's contact or not, whether there's pressure or not. That's a kind of sensation. Noticing if we don't seem to have any sensation in a part of our body, like we might say, oh, my belly feels numb, or my head feels empty. Or when I try to notice my shoulders, I can't feel them. I actually can't feel them. And then I would call that a sensation of blankness or numbness or something like that. So we also want to notice when there's a fullness of sensation and when there's no sensation that we can access. All of these things will get you kind of building a vocabulary of the language of the reptile brain, and learning to communicate with it so that you can understand its messages, and so you can speak back to it. And usually what we want to speak back to the reptile brain, because it's there, usually comes up swiftly when it feels like we're in danger. something in our environment is too much or is wrong or is a violation or reminds us of a past unsafe or violating situation, the reptile brain goes and you know, it starts doing its thing and creating difficult sensations. But we can speak back to it. We can say, okay, something is scary, but here's the sensation of my drink, and I'm going to drink it really slowly and really feel that presence and that warmth and that comfort. And what do you think of that, reptile brain? So we can speak back to it and go, okay, and by the way, back again to befriending our body, making friends with our body, not making it wrong, not making our brains wrong for what our brains need and how they work. We don't have to say, relax, everything's fine. What's the matter with you, reptile brain? We don't need to do that. We can just go, oh, I see that, you know, by what's happening in my shoulders, or my eyes are getting tight, or my breath is getting shallow. I see that my reptile brain is pretty freaked out right now. And I can kindly acknowledge that, which is another safety practice. If we kindly acknowledge our sensations, they usually come down a notch. Like if they're anxious sensations, if we can say, oh, I'm really anxious, even that can at least start to put a dent in that, like, you know, reactivity, feeling all stuck. So we can talk the more we can talk the language of the reptile brain, the more we can say, oh, well, you might feel like this, and that's fine. And there's also this sensation, and there's also my bones. I'm walking around in public here, or I'm in this meeting or whatever, I'm at a party, and I don't feel like I know what's going on. I don't feel like I fit in. It feels like too much input. But wait, I do have my skeleton. Is that still there? Oh, that's still there. Let me make sure I know it's still there. I'm going to squeeze it. Yeah, that bone is still there. These bones are still here. I'm going to squeeze my hip bones maybe, or, you know, one of the bones I squeeze is my collarbone. It doesn't seem to be socially unacceptable or weird to squeeze your collarbone now and again. Nobody's ever looked at me like, what are you doing? And yet it comforts me. It's like, there's something solid that was there yesterday and was there the day before. It's not a surprise. It's not changing. So that can be really comforting. What I'm realizing as we're getting near to the end of this hour is I said I was going to spend the time talking about a bunch of things, and what I've really focused on was befriending your body, understanding that the trauma that comes along with being on the spectrum is usually about ableism and a neurotypical world that is not accommodating us and not understanding us and making us wrong, and that we internalize that as well. It creates obstacles for us that are real and exhausts us, and they can turn on ourselves on top of that. Like, why am I not more social, or why do I need to recover for 2 days after a day of social time? So I've been spending the time focusing on that and on some practical ways to reduce anxiety levels, and haven't gotten to the other things I said I would do. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into part 1, part 2, etc. And the next webinar I'm going to do for somatics on the spectrum is going to be about the next topic, which is fatigue. And maybe in that one, if it doesn't go the way this one did, maybe I'll also bring in, you know, what to do about too much sensory input, you know, some extra tips or suggestions. But that's what we just did today. So, and I hope it was helpful. So we're going to end, and thanks for watching and listening. I hope this is useful to you. And feel free to email me with questions. I'm at vanessar@cs.com. You can find my email address at my website. My website is www.vanessar.com, VANISSAR.com, vanessar.com. I welcome phone calls or emails. And if you think you would like to do a private somatic coaching session with me, I do private coaching sessions for folks on the spectrum, geared towards exactly what you're working on and struggling with and wanting to, embrace in your life. And I do that remotely over video or the phone, and I also do it in person in Sebastopol, California. So please contact me if you think you'd like a session. And you can also just contact me with any questions you might have. And we'll do another one of these probably next month. Okay. Thank you much for your presence and your attention. And have a good day.